tonight. I'm Jen Krajak, and I'm the program coordinator at the Lopez Library. It's actually a lot of fun being your program coordinator. Tonight's the final program in our adventure series, Beyond Limits. And with this series, we have had the pleasure of hosting climbers Jim and Leif Whitaker, world kayaker Nigel Foster, a film on Race Across America, the toughest bike race in the world, introduced by their director, and Mountain Madness, sharing 32 years of climbing and trekking around the world. These programs and tonight's program were made possible through funding by Friends of Lopez Library and also the Ramsey Shirk Fund. With their generosity and enthusiasm, we've made this series and much of what you get from your library available to you for free. Tonight we welcome Greg Blomberg, our final speaker in this series. And I want to thank Greg for agreeing to come here tonight and share his story about the first winter ascent of Denali, the highest mountain in North America. Greg was the lead in that expedition, which over a period of 42 days in 1967 battled high winds, a ferocious storm, brutal temperatures, to reach the summit via the mountain's west buttress. To consider the courage and complexity of being on this trip is one thing. To consider leading it too, as Greg did, is remarkable. This year is the 50th anniversary of that expedition, and we're grateful tonight to welcome climber Greg Blomberg.
Thanks a lot to everybody that showed up tonight. I'm really honored to have such a full house here, and it's gonna be a little bit shocking because I've got a lot of material to go through, and I'm gonna try to speak very rapidly, and so it's really going to be coming at you in a hurry. And the problem of having so much material and trying to deliver it so fast is that I just hope I don't leave too many questions unanswered or things unsaid, but we'll do what we can. Ian and I, when we realized it sounded like there was going to be a lot of people, we thought we should make a little money off this event. We were going to have my son Raven, who's a glassblower, blow us some little snow globos, that little guys going up the peak. Well, he just didn't get to it. One thing I need to do is to apologize for the photos. The photos are what they are, and they were put together after the climb. The original, after the climb was done, the film, the most important film that we had was taken, it was sent to New York City to Life magazine, and that's where they developed it. They were 2 1/4 transparencies, beautiful photographs taken on a rollie by Dr. Von Micklen. And anyway, they sent them back to me, but they were unmounted. When they came back to me, they were unmounted, and so they had to be mounted up as slides. And so I sent them to Kodak in Salt Lake City, and I sent 67 of the best photos. I chose the best ones out of that group, and asked them to just put frames around 67 of them. And when they came back, there was 13. And it was a huge disappointment because there was no replacing those photos. That was the end of that. And I don't know whether somebody stole them in the process there or whether they wrecked them somehow, but they sent back 13. So I knew they got them and everything, but that's what happened. And so we didn't have the best photos from this climb by any means, and what we have now are just like scraps and bits and pieces. So it's just what it is, and I'm glad to have them. These shots were put together by Art Davidson, and so anyway, I want to start out by saying I'm no hero. I wasn't a hero on this climb. It was really kind of a low point in my life, and I'll tell you a bunch of reasons why that was. But anyway, I didn't get to the summit of Mount McKinley, different from what said in the paper, and I just want you to know that I'm no hero. And I want to give you a little history on how I got started. I was in Colorado and living in Colorado, and I started rock climbing, and I started a business manufacturing rock climbing hardware, and I became interested in, this is abbreviated stuff, folks. Became interested in winter climbing, and I had a class of teenagers that would run up with me and with Edie, my wife Edie, and we'd go up and we'd sleep overnight on some of the 14,000-foot peaks. And one of those, to see what winter was like in the middle of winter. Nobody had been doing that, But anyway, on one of those climbs, it snowed while we were up there in the night, and we came back down the next day. We had driven off the main highway, and our cars had snow up to the top of the tires. There was no leaving there. And so we walked down to the highway and got our way to the nearest town, and we went into the road crew and we said, when are you going to plow that road? And they said, oh, we don't plow that in the winter, next spring. Okay, well, anyway, they were sweet with us and did go up there and plow us out so we could go retrieve our vehicles. I've done, besides this McKinney climb, there was lots of other climbs along the way. I climbed the four highest peaks in Mexico, four highest volcanoes, including Pico de Orizaba, the highest one, 18,006, and Edie climbed that peak with me. And those volcanoes are beautiful, and they are not difficult climbs. They're somewhat elevated, but they're not difficult climbs. But you don't want to fall down in the caldera. I mean, it's amazing. And so anyway, in 1964, I climbed Mount Logan. That's the second highest peak in North America. And it's 19,850 feet, and it's in the Yukon. And we put up a new route on the north side of the mountain. While we were climbing along, we were climbing a ridge, and we were climbing along, and it was a highly corniced ridge. And this cornice, you know what a cornice is? It's where the snow is the blowing snow is coming from this side. That's the slant of the wind there, and it blows out a big, long cornice on the other side of the ridge. Well, those things fall off, eventually. They just get too big to support themselves. And we were up on this ridge, in a narrow part of this ridge, and we had to make a camp, and I'm stamping out a tent platform, and I stamped through into a crevasse, and I just reflectively put out my elbows, put out my arms, and caught myself on the edges of this parting line. It was a parting line more than it was a crevasse, but it was where that cornice was going to fall off eventually. And I looked down, and it was this narrow slit that went at a little angle, and then it bottomed out in about 50 feet, and it would have squeezed the life out of me. I don't think they could have got me out of there. I jammed in. It just glare ice on the sides of that thing. So it was one of my lives, and they say cats have 9 lives, and people have a lot more than one life oftentimes too, and I've had a whole bunch of them, and some of them have been pretty dumb, but they are. And so after that, we kept climbing up the peak, and Logan is a huge mountain. It's got a huge, massive, it's one of the biggest mountains in the world, but it's not one of the highest mountains in the world. But anyway, we got up to where it is the plateau of the peak, and various little peaks rise out of that one, and off of that, and we were camped on about a 40-degree slope, or a little bit steeper. We cut out a tent platform so we could have the tent, and there was 2 of us in one spot, and then 3 of us in another spot. But anyway, I was in with this other guy, and it started blowing in the night. a blizzard, and it was blowing down that slope. And so what's going to happen? The snow kept trying to fill in that spot there. We'd hollowed out a spot. The snow was going to go in there, you know. And after a while, it would have just flattened the tent with us in it. And so we had to get out of the tent about every hour and dig that out. And to get out of the tent in a blowing snow in the middle of the night on a 40-degree slope is to invite death for sure. So we would have to be roped up. The guy inside the tent had a rope on the guy on the outside. It seems absurd, but if you would get blown down that slope a little ways, you'd never find your way back. You couldn't see your way back. You couldn't find your way back. It would be impossible. And so we did that for 4 days. And then went up and made the summit on July 4th in 1964. And we named our route Independence Ridge because we made it on July 4th. And so anyway, I'm just going to cut some of this stuff out because I know we're not going to have time for all of it. So I conceived, because of that winter climbing and all of that, I conceived the idea with a friend, Art Davidson, the idea of climbing Mount McKinley in winter. But we had no takers. Nobody wanted to go with us. All the other mountaineers said, "Oh, no, good idea." But anyway, we couldn't get anybody to go with us. So in the meantime, Edie and I were living in Denver, and I had this business going, and I wanted to. I got the idea in my head that my climbing days were over. I wanted to get a sailboat and move to the Northwest. Okay, so that was the plan. We had this exciting new plan going, and in fact, well, let me try and keep it in order here. Art, in the meantime, was living in Alaska. He wasn't giving up on this thing. So within about a year, he had a team of 4 other guys that were willing to go with us. And in the meantime, Edie and I moved to Bremerton. And we hadn't quite, we moved just before this climb started, so we hadn't gotten quite to the boat yet. That boat, by the way, we used it to sail in a couple years later into Fish Bay, and I got out of the boat and started walking down Fish Bay Road, and 20 minutes later I said, I'm going to live here. And we went and we sold the boat and bought our land that we have today. Is anybody in this room that's been on Lopez longer than me? 50 years, 49 years for me. There you go. Well, there you go. Well, anybody? All right, guys. Okay, I'm so thankful you're here. Yeah, good deal. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, Lopez is our special home, and such a wonderful thing that we have found it and be here together. Okay, so anyway, we had these 4 guys, Art and myself, and a young man by the name of Dave Johnson, another young guy, young American guy, and a doctor that wanted to go with us. There was an actual doctor in Anchorage, George von Wickman, a German national, and Shiro Nishime, a Japanese climber who was kind of a famous climber in Japan, a pretty famous climber in Japan, and led many groups, including groups in the Himalayas, and he joined us, and a man by the name of John Edwards, Dr. John Edwards, and he was a doctor of entomology, and he studied insects in the Arctic and Antarctic, and so he had an interest in cold things and cold places and stuff like that. So he wanted to come along. Well, then after a little bit, Art found 2 more, and they were Jacques Batkin. By the way, John Edwards was a New Zealand national. He found 2 more, Jacques Batkin, who was a Frenchman, and Ray Genet, who was Swiss. And Jacques Batkin had the year before climbed Mount Huntington, which is right next to McKinley, but it's like a spire. And he was on the first ascent of it with a famous French mountaineer, Lionel Touret. And that was the year before, and I mean, that's like death-defying climbing, and he was about 5'8", but he was just stout, and his nickname was Farine, which means flour in French, and it's because he worked in a flour mill, and he would grab these 100-pound sacks of flour and just throw them on his back, and I mean, he was like, you would imagine if this guy being invisible, and so. But anyway, Art and I argued about taking Ray Genet because Ray had no climbing background whatsoever. But he said, I'm Batkin's friend and I speak French, and none of you guys speak French, and he didn't speak a word of English. And so that made sense to him, but we had our reservations about it. But the longer he kept at it, he kept calling me in Denver to talk to me about coming along and bugging Art. And Art said, I don't want to take Genet, I don't want him on this climb. And I said, Art, you're the co-leader, you're in Anchorage, he's in Anchorage, tell him. And Art would never take that responsibility to tell him, which turned out to be the beginning of problems that Art and I had together. I was counting on him to be with me on this. And climbers oftentimes get into these situations. I mean, for one thing, I was 25, he was 22. We were kids, and climbers often get into these situations where there can be frictions that come up, and they can be over life and death issues, decisions that you have to make, and they have to be the correct one, and all of that. And it often happens on expeditions, and so we that was the start of ours before we even really quite got going. So anyway, we decided, okay, well, we go ahead and do this climb. And I said, I'm not going to tell him, you have to tell him. He wouldn't tell him, so we had Ray Genet with us. And it turned out to be an interesting character. I'll tell you more about him as we go through this. Anyway, we had a little company in Boulder, Colorado, Elfsport, who made us down parkas, down pants, mitts, everything, windbreakers, tents. And the federal government, we got their Arctic issue of boots, and we got a lot of help from different places. We solicited, we needed it, we were just kids, and we were trying to get this expedition together. And it was a costly thing. You have to hire planes and stuff to transport your gear, and people came from all over. And so anyway, we met in Alaska, in Anchorage. We got our stuff together. Then we flew to Fairbanks, where we were part of the money raising was with the Institute of, I guess you can just start playing some slides. Why not? Arctic Technology, and they were going to test us and make a baseline study of what our weaknesses and our strengths were. And when we came back, they were going to, go, then on from there with another set of tests. And so after we were done with about 3 days of that testing and everything, we went to Talkeetna, Alaska, where we met with the pilot that was going to fly us in, Don Sheldon. And we camped a couple of days in his hangar while we waited for good weather on the peak. And then we flew into just outside the park. He flew us into just outside the park. You can't land the plane in the national park unless it's an emergency, kind of situation. And so anyway, he landed all, the first load of gear and stuff like that, and us all in there. We had then 8 climbing members, and in several trips to do that over the day. And so after we got a camp set up there and had this dump of stuff, we were going to do siege climbing, what's called siege climbing, where you siege the peak. You get a bunch of gear, and you get you ferry a load up to a camp. You put in a new camp. You go back. You get another load, and you take it up to that camp. And then you move another camp higher, and you ferry a load up, and that's the way you do it. And after there was, it came to a time when that same climb was done in alpine, what is called alpine style, where you start at the bottom, you climb up, and that's great. But that isn't the way that this first climb went. There was. Okay, well, we'll go on. Hang on a sec. Yeah. Okay, well, so here's Shiro Nishime, and behind him Jacques Batkin, and then Art, and then Dave, and then George von Bickman, the doctor, and myself, and then John Edwards, and Pirate, who is Ray Genet. He's standing on the right there. And he wanted all the orange gear. We had all the different gear, and he wanted all the orange gear. And he was great at saying "arg," and so we said, okay, well, we nicknamed him Pirate, and he became Pirate, and the rest of his career, that was what people called him. So anyway, we had this first camp there, and we started to ferry gear up. And Jacques Batkin came up with his first load from down below to the camp unroped. We'd been roped, you know. Well, judgment call number one, bad judgment call. Nobody said anything, but nobody wants a rope. No more than anybody wants a dust mask on their face, when you're. But it's a safety thing, right? And but we're young and maybe too macho or something like that. But his doing that, he was as experienced as any of us. Just kind of like, I don't know. We just, like I say, nobody talked about it. But it's all right. I mean, I blame myself for what followed because I should have said we need to be roped. We're on a glacier. We were on the Talkeetna Glacier, on the Kailtna Glacier, and it is one that was not marked by Bradford Washburn as a crevasse zone, a glacier. The upper part of that was not marked with crevasses. But any glacier, you got to know they have crevasses. Glacier is a big mass of ice, and it's moving downhill. And it gets stresses and strains, it goes over things and takes a dive over a steeper place or whatever, and it lets off that tension by making cracks, crevasses, and they're extremely dangerous. And the problem, in the summertime, you can climb a lot of times in areas, especially in late summer, where you can see the crevasses because the snow bridges and stuff like that are melted and they've dropped away, and you can see a sag and one thing or another. But in the wintertime, that was a new thing to us, to have a crevassed area to travel in. But anyway, we just started. We started transferring the gear to the next highest up camp. We traveled over the glacier. The snow was packed, and I first go up. I'm first guy up by myself. We were just climbing, free, just running around on the glacier. And I went up and picked a campsite, dropped off my gear. I came down, and I met the guys coming back up. Okay, Art went by me, Dave, and then Jacques Batkin. And so I load up for a second trip, and I'm moving up the glacier. And after I get close to where this campsite that I picked, I see a pack lying on the snow. I can't figure out what that means, And so I go faster and faster up to it, and there is a pack that's caught in a crevasse, and there's a snow shovel in the top of that pack. And when the pack went down, the snow shovel caught itself on the top of this narrow crevasse, like the one I fell into in about that size of a thing, a little bit deeper one, no doubt. But anyway, that it hung up on the lip of the crevasse, and so I thought it was Dave that had fallen in, and I started yelling and waving to those guys that were up, beyond me where I picked this campsite, and they, started running down there, and luckily enough, they were smart enough to be roped. I think they figured out, what had happened. And one of the reasons was when I went up there, and then I went back down. I crossed that area twice. When Art went up, he fell into that crevasse, but he caught himself and got out of it. And then he kept on going up. Instead of parking right there and saying and yelling to everybody, say, rope up, get roped up, he just went up to the camp, throws down his stuff. And he didn't even tell those guys that it had happened. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking, but anyway, it didn't matter. It was bad judgment, on his part, and that just is what happens. So when they came running back down, and we looked down in this crevasse, and I'm yelling, thinking it's Dave, and it turns out it was Jacques Batkin that had done it. And he didn't like the waist strap, that thick, heavy waist strap on one of those backpacks. That would have saved his life had he had that on, because it's strong enough to have saved his life. But when he fell, he hit his regular shoulder straps, and they broke. And so he went into the crevasse. He hit a ledge about 30 feet down and then went about 60 feet into the bottom of this crevasse. And so when these guys came down, Dave Johnson went down into the crevasse, tied rope on him, and we yanked him out onto the glacier. Tried to revive him, but there was absolutely no way that was going to happen. And eventually, Dr. Wickman said he's gone. And anyway, it was later in the camp that Art tells how he fell into the crevasse, and the rest of us just kind of like, wow. And so anyway, we moved back close to Batkin's body, and we set up an igloo camp. And we had a radio, and so we called out, and Ray patched through to Jacques' mother in France and said, we were hoping that she would say, bury him on the glacier. But she said to send the body of my son, Jacques Batkin, home. And so it was set up that Don Sheldon would come in, pick up Ray and the body, and they'd take care of whatever had to happen, and then Ray would fly back in and rejoin us. So in the meantime, we're all depressed and consider bagging the climb, and I realized I didn't want to die for the climb. But anyway, the decision of the group was to climb on and be safe. That was the idea of it. And so while waiting for Ray to return, we worked at picking up another plane load of gear up a side valley there where Sheldon had dropped it off, and it was fresh powder snow. And John and I are roped up. We start off first, and John and I are roped up, and we're headed up to that cache. And all of us, we're 150 feet apart, basically, because the ropes are 150 foot. And so he's up ahead of me and going along. I see a little poof of snow go up, and then all of a sudden I'm flying through the air, you know. And I went into self-arrest, and I stopped his fall, and I put my axe into the snow, and I tied him off. And I went around, and I looked down into him. He's just dangling on his rope in this cavern more than a crevasse. I mean, it was huge. It was, and it was ethereally beautiful. I mean, believe me, that terrain can be beautiful as well. And so anyway, he's dangling there. He's in a little narrow part of it, and so he managed to get his ski poles wedged so that he can kind of sit there. And he's real casual. He didn't get hurt a bit, you know. So he's taking pictures and all that. And I'm yelling to the other guys to come up there. So the other guys get up there, and we figure out what we're going to do. And John said, well, I want to do a self-help rescue, you know. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. And one of them is called a Bulgarian. You tie loops into the rope, and you got two ropes going up, and you lift up one foot, and the guys up on top take in the slack and hold that, and then you stand up in that, and then you lift up the other foot, and so forth. The problem is that these ropes, long ropes, nylon, you pick up your foot, maybe 12 inches, and then you lose about 4 of those inches in the stretch of the rope and so forth, and it's exhausting. It's not easy. I mean, it wouldn't be easy under any circumstances, and besides, if somebody falls in a crevasse, they're in shock. Maybe they don't know it. I mean, he had us convinced that he was doing just great. But basically you're in shock, because that's not a healthy situation in your body. And so anyway, we tried that for a little while, and everything else we could think of, and then we decide, okay, we're just going to yank him out. And yank him out is you send a loop down essentially, and a pulley, and he puts the pulley on his gear, and you just pull him out. We had plenty of strength to pull him out of there. So we start yanking him out of there, but this fresh snow that I was talking about was so deep that the rope would just keep cutting down into the lip of that crevasse. We finally got him to where he was about 8 feet below us, and he somehow or another untied his main line and retied it with more slack, because it was pinching him, and we realized that all he has to do is go unconscious, let his arms go up, and he's out of there. He's just like back down into the crevasse without protection. And so anyway, and he's getting, he's he really is, the life's being crushed out of him by all these lines and stuff like that. And we put packs on the snow and everything to try and keep it from cutting in, but anyway, so we realized we had to do a whole new line when he was that close to us, because we couldn't use those old lines. It was impossible. They weren't going anywhere. And Shiro got into that crevasse with him and tied him off so that we could pull him out. But just as we were pulling him out, he went unconscious. And when we lifted him up over onto the snow, he was unconscious there. And then he blinked and he was all right. And realizing, he was all right. He was, he was almost jolly, but he'd been miserable. And so anyway, it was kind of a comedy of errors. Anyway, Ray, that incident happens. Ray comes back in, and we start up the mountain again. And see.
Sorry, could you show us kind of where you were then?
Okay, well, I mean, you can see there it is. We were down from that where all those other incidents happened, and this is our that's our third camp essentially there.
Which one?
This Iglooplex right there at 10,200, and then there was a little kind of temporary campsite at 12.5, and then a pretty main camp at 14.4. And when in those areas, like we learned how to put up an igloo in about an hour and a half at the maximum. And the beauty of an igloo is you put up an igloo. I mean, it's 40 below outside, but you put up an igloo, you carve in some benches to sleep on and stuff like that, and you hang up a lantern and you start cooking dinner. It's 32 degrees inside, man. We're talking snow. It's frozen ice, and it's no colder than 32 degrees. And so it's a great thing. In the meantime, a tent in those same circumstances, you have this little, thin layer of nylon. You exhale. What's that? It's moisture. We're in extremely dry air. Cold air is extremely dry. It condenses on the tent, on the inside of the tent as snow, and then the wind blows, and you wake up in the morning and you've got an inch of snow on your sleeping bag. we had that happen. I mean, so whenever we could, we made igloos for being in. Well, anyway, if we could come back to this, I don't want to keep going higher with that map until we cover some of this ground, verbally here.
Greg, you want me just to run through some scenes like this?
Go ahead, yeah, you can do it, and if you can figure out a way to get back there or whatever, I don't know. Let me see.
It'd be nice though if you told us what we were looking at. Look
Yeah, because it's kind of like.
Let us talk.
Just let him talk.
So anyway, yeah, see, I'm not even really so familiar with these pictures because it's Art put them together. I saw them for the first time yesterday. Okay, so anyway, that corner that we went around on that map was called Windy Corner, and then we went up to below the west buttress there, and that's where those 14,000-foot igloos are. And the top part of that is a lot steeper than it looks. In fact, it's all steeper than it looks here. You're on okay, so we're below the ice wall in the igloos, and the next day we return down, bring up more gear, and we climb the wall. We follow the ridge to a camp at 17,200 feet, and so that shows on here too. 17.2, it says cave, and there wasn't snow for igloos, so we hollowed out a little cave into the snow that was there, and used a parachute to close that entrance. So we didn't have the snow problem inside, but it wasn't warm at all like an igloo. We were all kind of like, you couldn't hardly sit up, whereas in an igloo you could stand up. We set them up so you could just stand up in them and everything. So anyway, not a great place to spend a whole long time. So anyway, we're up at 17.2, and we make this snow cave, and on the last trip up, Art decides to untie from his partners and spend the night alone. I never did hear what that was about. I mean, he made it sound like he was just wanted to be alone in the reverie of the mountain, and maybe that's the way it was, or maybe he was exhausted, I don't know, but we never heard exactly why it was that he decided to do that. But so he's down, you know, on the top of the west buttress, and we're up at 17.2. In the morning, the rest of us, we had 6 of us then, we took off to go climb the peak. And so we climbed up to Denali Pass, okay, and that's another steep slope going up to the pass, and that's 18,200 feet, and then from there we started up the peak. Well, we're going along and everything is good. Oh, actually, I have to say, the night before that happened, you know, Art's sleeping in a different place, but it's a beautiful starlit night. And we can see Anchorage, the lights of Anchorage, you know, from on the ridge right there. And I got on, we had a handheld radio, and I called my father in Minneapolis, and I told him that where we were, and I said, we're going to do this tomorrow, you know, we're going to get up there tomorrow. And he said, be careful, and it was just sweet to be able to talk to him. And so anyway, we started climbing that day, and we're climbing along, and we get up within, we pass Denali Pass, and we're up on the peak, and we get up to where I figured we were about 1,000 feet of elevation from the summit, and it turned to a whiteout. Okay, so we started to put in wands, but we didn't have many wands. And what a wand is a little bamboo like a garden stake, and on the top of it you have a little flag. Okay, a red flag. And so we started to wand it, and you'd put a wand in when you couldn't, you know, and you'd keep going until you could just barely see that one. You put in another one, and you hope it doesn't thicken, you know. But anyway, so we went along until we were out of wands, and I said, we're going back down. Because, I mean, that's sheer suicide to have, you know, 6 guys wandering around on the top of that peak and not being able to see where you were going and not being able to find your way back down. That's the end. And so we turned around, we retraced our steps, and just before we got down to Denali Pass, here comes Art just huffing up, trying to catch up to us. And so, anyway, we went back down to 17.2, and let me see, let me catch up here on this. Okay. And oh yeah, you know, something that came through our mind while we were doing that was we were on the summit plateau of the peak, and I remember the story about a German couple that was had climbed the peak, made the summit, and then they got caught in a whiteout, and they said, we've got to sit here and wait it out. And they sat beside the trail to the summit for 2 years before the park claimed their bodies, you know, got out and claimed their bodies. And it's kind of a grim roadside sign of the dangers that are available in these circumstances. Anyway, they weren't there. I mean, that had happened before we got there, but still, that's, you know, goes through your mind. You realize you got to get the hell out of there. And so. Anyway, and the fog cleared just about the time we got down to where Art was, but there was no time to reclimb. I mean, you just can't do it.
Greg, is this the...
Okay, so that's getting that was getting John Edwards out of the crevasse, and so. You can see those big boots that we got from the feds, and but man, they kept your feet warm. Although in the end, there was a few toes, you know, left on the mountain essentially. Okay, so the next morning we said we're gonna go, and so on February 28th we try again, and. Exhausted John and George decide to stay down. They don't get very far at all, and they decide they're going to stay down. And I wrote to Shiro, and we climbed to Denali Pass. And in the meantime, Pirate, Art, and Dave are, you know, on the other rope here. And so we get to Denali Pass, and Shiro says, I can't do it today. I want to go down. And I said, will you do it tomorrow? And he said, yes, he'd come back. He'd try again tomorrow. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to go down with you. And the others said, Greg, you know, just let him go down by himself. There's no crevasses between there and the camp. And just let him go down by himself and come with us. And that would have been 4 of us. Well, I decided that we'd have, I mean, we're talking about descending a steep slope, but one that if you get started moving on, you can easily just keep moving on it. And so anyway, I thought about that, and then I also thought that these guys had brought some stuff up in case they had to bivouac. They had a parachute. They had 2 sleeping bags. Pirate decided he didn't want to take his sleeping bag up there. We had those down pants, and Shiro had also, he'd left his sleeping bag down lower, so he kind of set that up at the last camp, the 14,000 foot camp. And he said he just didn't want to carry it, but really what he was trying to do, we found out later, was carry heavier loads, because he's the littlest guy, and he kept feeling like he wasn't carrying his share of weight. And so anyway, Pirate didn't have a sleeping bag, and I said, well, I'm going to leave my sleeping bag. So you have 3 sleeping bags here. I had a stove with full of gas there, and my lunch. And so I left them that stuff, and we turned around and went back down. And those guys continued up. And they did about 10 o'clock that night, made the summit, and turned around, came back, and were too exhausted by the time they got to Denali Pass to descend down. So they bivouacked. They made a little bivouac there. In the morning, Shiro and I, we start off right away in the morning from the camp, and we're going to go up there and see them and then keep going and climb the peak. And as we're climbing up, we hear this noise, this roar, and we get higher and higher, and we realize that it's wind, and Denali Pass is a pass in the mountain, and there's 2 heavy pieces big pieces on both sides. And what happens when the wind comes this way, it's got to go funnel in through that pass, so that the pass turns out to be a venturi, and the wind in that pass was way stronger than it was any place else, although there was plenty of wind in other places. But I mean, that wind was, I'd never been in wind like that. And it was easily more than 100 miles an hour. And so Shiro and I keep climbing till we want to see what it is, and we get up to where there wasn't, we weren't going to climb, you know, we weren't going to both just kind of wander over the top of that pass. You could tell what was happening. The farther up we got, the more wind there was. And so I went up on a line to see if I could see anything and stuff like that, and I didn't see anything. And Shiro, then when I came back down, I said, nothing, there's nothing, you know. And Shiro said, I want to try. So Shiro went up once, and then he decided he wanted to go up in a different place. And so I belayed him, and he went up to a different place. And the wind has got the rope just going like this, and I see that the rope comes off of him. You know, it just unties because it's just flapping around so much. And he can't hear me. I could scream my loudest, but he couldn't possibly hear me. I mean, we're talking freight train noises. But I'm waving to him, and he sees me, and then realizes he's untied, and really freaked out because another step, and he could have been blown off balance, and he'd have blown right past those guys over the peak. You know, I mean, right past them. He'd have just, well, it's hurricane kind of forces. You know, you can't, you know, oppose it, but. What those guys didn't know what it was, or wouldn't realize that they were in a venturi, and that all they had to do was get a few feet, less than a rope's length below the pass, and they could climb just fine. They could do just fine. But anyway, there's no way we could tell them that. Shiro said he saw part of a sleeping bag flopping, but we didn't know what that meant. I mean, so anyway, we went back down, and.
Greg, do you want to narrate anything about this one? It's got some.
Okay, yeah, well, you can see that slope. Here's the slope that goes up from 14,000 where we had 2 igloos. Then we climbed along that ridge, and we camped right up where the black, you know, right this area right here. That's where our camp was. That's 1,000 feet below this Denali Pass, and you can see this is this slope that they said Shiro would just go back down to this camp, but it isn't all that safe a proposition. So anyway, that's Denali Pass. That's where they were bivouacked, and you can see how the mountain shaped there to be this V to just, not to mention coming up from down below, to just funnel that wind right through there. So anyway, in my journal on March 1st, they went up the 28th. In my journal, March 1st, I write, "A frightening thing is developing. Please, God, let us hear their voices. Let them descend unharmed. Give them a break in the wind and the wisdom and stamina to use it." On March 2nd, I wrote, "Windy and whiteout this morning. Very bad conditions. I can't remember a more pronounced terror in my life." On March 3rd, it was decided that John and I should make a run for the radio. We considered that they were in an extremely perilous situation, and that even if the wind were to die down after a while, they wouldn't have the strength. We didn't think they could die of dehydration. At high elevation, like I say, the air is extremely dry. You breathe hard because you're working hard, and man, you lose moisture like crazy. And so anyway, they only had a stove full of gas when we left them, which is not enough for 3 guys to make water for day after day. And I can tell you what happened with that here in a minute. Anyway, so we decided that John and I would make a run for the radio at 7,600 feet. That's how far we had to go down there. And so that would be about 10,000 feet down the mountain. And just above the fixed lines, I was blown off my feet, twisted my ankle, and so then that slowed us down. And the ice wall slowed us down so much that we had to spend the night in the igloos below the ice wall. I write, "Can't this weather end? What a hell this is." In the igloo, we realized how much we were suffering at 17,200 feet in this little miserable ice cave. It says, we just drank pot after pot of water. Even though we were bloated, we were still thirsty. Our bodies hadn't caught up yet, and they kept saying, drink more, you know. I mean, it's crazy. Now, that was at 17,200 where we had, but it was just inconvenient to do it. But we realized how bad it was. We also realized getting out of there allowed Shiro and George to have an easier time of it. You know, they didn't have to melt so much water. And so, anyway, I said we have to descend 7,000 feet tomorrow, quite a day, and I dread the crevasses. With 2 guys, you know, going into a crevasse could be pretty challenging. Warm wind came in today, -10. It had to have been colder than 30 to 40 degrees minus at 17.2. And I said, those above only have to descend 1,000 feet to get to safety. Winter climbing Denali is no harder than we predicted it to be. I can't think of one item of clothing or gear we lacked. It's all just about the weather, and really that can happen anytime, summer or winter, as that German couple found out. They were doing a summer climb, and we're caught up there. So here's what was happening to the 3 at Denali Pass. They're stuffed in their sleeping bags. Their sleeping bags are turning to ice because of condensed moisture from their bodies, and their toes are starting to freeze. Their body just shut off what it can't support. And after they were there for a couple days, Dave had said that he had climbed the peak earlier, about 3 years earlier, and he left a cache of gas at Denali Pass. There was also caches of food that people had left there, because it's an obvious and easy thing to imagine anyway. And but he was unwilling to go out to try and find it. I mean, these guys are weak, they're in bad shape, and Pirate says he'll go. He'll see if he can find it. And so, you can imagine, telling the 3rd rock on the left. He was out there a long time. The wind was still blowing, but and he was having to crawl around rather than stand up. But he was able to not be so in danger that he couldn't do this. And he crawled around and he found that gas. And after a while, the guys decided, oh God, he's gone. He must have blown off the peak. But he then came crawling back in, and
Where are we?
I think that's the route up to the 17,000 foot camp along that, over the top of the West Buttress. Yeah. So it's plenty beautiful, man. Let me tell you. I mean, it's gorgeous. You know, scenery. It's just incredible. And the wintertime makes it all the more stark and amazing. So anyway, they've got gas. They can make water. You know, and it saves their life. And they did find a stash that some other group had left, and food, and so they had, you know, candy bars and stuff like that. But you can live for a while on a candy bar. If that's what you're living on, that's better than, a lot better than nothing.
Who are these?
You know, I don't know who's on the left, but that's Shiro on the right. Yeah. I guess that's what do you call a winter McKinley Klein coil of rope. Well, you know what? This is me, because that ice axe is in the next room. Okay, so anyway, they're up there, you know, just dealing with that, and they had a couple days when they could have actually gotten down because, like I said, the wind wasn't blowing, but they didn't know that. And we had left Shiro and George up in that high camp with the idea that as soon as the weather changed, they would go up and help these guys down. The thing is, they spent 2 more days there, and that never happened. And so they just had given them up. I mean, you know, I didn't know what else to do either, but, well, we didn't know, but anyway, it looked pretty bleak. We didn't know about the gas, for one thing, and that alone would have probably been enough to do them in. They were pretty marginal circumstances. So anyway, on March 4th, we got up to leave that igloo camp below the buttress, and but we got up and it was a complete whiteout. There was no going anywhere. And so the route from here to Windy Corner, I say, is only a 1/2 dozen wands. And we waited until 1:30 p.m. for the slightest break in the weather. Eileen, did you ever get me the book in here in case I want to read a little piece out of this book? Sorry. Okay, I said, okay, now, that was March 4th. March 5th, we left early with a ground blizzard blowing, but you could see. And we got to our 10,200 foot camp, and there were planes buzzing all around, you know. But we didn't know what was happening out in the outer world. We only knew that we had been in contact with them, and then we weren't. And the last thing they heard from us is, we're going for the summit, and then nothing. And so we just didn't realize what was happening in the outer world, and I didn't even imagine or think about it much. I mean, we had enough to think about right there. So anyway, on March 5th we left and we got to that camp, but then planes were running around and we were trying to stamp messages in the snow. All kinds of things. Just slowed us down, you know. So when we left there, we ended up, we started hiking again at 4 p.m. and we had to make a bivouac at 10 p.m. in the dark, and I just built a little snow cave. John was pretty much done in. He was just plain exhausted. And anyway, oh yeah, okay, I say this, I go to my journal here, we'll see what I say. We had no idea the snow down here would be so deep and soft. Even with the snowshoes on, you go into your knees. We kept plodding along all until 10 p.m. in the dark. I dug a small snow cave and we crawled in and made 2 cups of hot water. The first flavored with something left in the pan at the last camp, probably Jello. John lost his lunch somewhere, so we had a piece of sausage each, and tomorrow there's a piece of chocolate each for breakfast. It was a beautiful, warm day. It still is tonight. Warm, you know, 10 below or something. But it looks all over the world like it'll be snowing and white out in the morning. If it is, we'll have to, we'll play hell to find the igloo. We need a little more clear weather before we'll be safe. we're probably within 1/2 mile of our camp, but we don't know. Okay, so it was snowing a lot, and like I say, we were in this deep snow, and we're going to go back and find a couple of igloos built out of snow. But what had happened when Pirate went out, he picked up a couple tall bamboos that were, well, 10-foot bamboos from rugs. They used to wrap rugs, you know, around bamboos, big pieces of bamboo. And so he brought 2 of those in, and we stuffed one of those in the top in that igloo. And so when we got going in the morning, I'd say the main thing is that we got to find camp tomorrow. If the weather's bad, we must try to make our way back up to 10,002. If it's really bad, we'd have to stay here, you know, with our candy bar breakfast, half each. Anyway, let me just get organized again here. So, so we're down there. John and I are down there, and we get up in the morning, and we're stumbling. John thought that we'd passed the campsite, but I didn't think that. And so we started going back, you know, down the glacier, and we came to where we saw this little piece of bamboo sticking out of the snow. And so, Jesus, we found the camp. So we dug down into it, and by now it's like, you know, it's feet and feet down in there. But that didn't matter. We went down in a little tunnel, and we got in there. In there, we found there was a Coleman lantern, and we turned it on. We were instantly warm. It would take off your shirt warm, you know, and start making water and drinking more and more and more water. But we warmed up the radio. There was a radio left in that igloo. And so we warmed up the radio so that we could call out to Don Sheldon. Well, we got out to Don Sheldon, and one thing we didn't realize, that Don Sheldon was really loving all this attention that he was getting, and he was a pretty good ego guy, and he was a hero guy. You know, you land planes on the glacier with ski wheels and stuff like that, and take up the skis and then land on the tarmac, and then land wherever, land on the sandbar when you're taking gold miners in. I mean, you know, it's heroic stuff, and so he was. He really, you know, felt that, and in the meantime, Life magazine's got a crew of guys in his hangar, and they're waiting to get in, you know, and stuff to get this story, and so anyway, Don wasn't telling us anything. We had no idea what was going on out there, and so we're there in that camp for 2 days. And then we're listening on the radio, and there's all these planes flying around, but it's kind of ground blizzard that's blowing, you know. But there's these planes are flying everywhere, you know. We don't know what's happening. And somebody said they spotted 3 guys coming down from the pass, and 3 guys. I mean, we only left 2 guys, you know. and I thought it had to be those 2 guys, and one of the other guys survived. I mean, I just couldn't make it to be more, you know. It was just impossible. But you know, I was hoping that was going to be so. But anyway, so those guys are coming down, you know, the peak, and these planes are flying over them, and they're throwing radios out the window and all this shit. And these guys are just exhausted. They're not going to go running around to get a radio, even if it's only 200 feet over there. And they just kept moving down, and they started raining candy bars on them. Whatever, but anyway. So night, we heard that there were 3 guys coming down, and so nightfall comes, and we hear on the radio that they picked up 3 guys. You know, so, Chopper does pick up 3 guys. We were thinking that from Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, they could get a Huey, which can land at those kind of elevations that they were at, and just to pick them up, pluck them off the peak. You know, not make them take a step if they didn't have to. But anyway, anyway, they got picked up. Well, it starts to get dark, and like I say, it's blowing this blizzard kind of, And I go out, I don't know what I was doing, I don't know, maybe I was just taking a pee or something, but anyway, I go out and I see down from me, barely can see through this blowing snow, a light going ding, 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 like that. It was like a, you know, I mean, what in the world, you know? So I go down there and it's a chopper that's landed right there, you know? I mean, how in the world it could have accidentally landed within about 100 feet of where our igloo was there? It just, like, that couldn't happen, but it did. And there was guys getting out of it, you know, and I didn't know what it was that was going on. And it turned out it was Jim Whitaker, and he was, that Peggy Wickman, von Wickman, had ordered asked for a rescue party to come up from Seattle. So these guys came up from Seattle. Well, anyway, they were going to save our water, and maybe they would have, except at that point we didn't need her help. But anyway, I'm looking here, and here's Whitaker, and you know, Jim Whitaker is about 5'6", or I mean 6'6", or something like that. And I've always looked up to him. But those guys had not thought about bringing snowshoes on this rescue attempt. And he was in snow up here, so I said, "Oh, hi, Jim." So when Jim was here earlier, I was going to tell him that story, but anyway, so then how are we doing on our time? Oh God, I was even faster than I was at home. I can't believe it.
Grace, do you want to narrate any of these photos, or you don't like? There's some.
See, that's like a food cache, that tin there. We had I said about Sheldon delivering a part of our food up this side valley, which was a mistake. He was thinking he was going to be outside the park, so he could do that. But he just kind of dumped the stuff out, and the ravens got into our, you know, candy bars and just started picking through the stuff, you know, and had a great time. There's John Edwards building an igloo. Inside the igloo, that spoon isn't floating, it's stuck in the you can tell Pirate is the all orange guy. It looks pretty red here, but I swear it was more orange.
He was the guy that you guys didn't want to take? No. He's the guy that you guys didn't want to take.
He's the guy that Art, you know, didn't want to take.
He went and found the gas.
He went and found the gas. Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you some other things in a minute here. Well, anyway, there's just shots of that terrain and us, you know, kind of like hacking our way through it. And I'm glad we have it, because this is all we have left over from that. That's Cheryl. And that's Dave. Dave is still alive. Cheryl's, the others are all dead, but Art and myself and Dave. And Wickman and Edwards, they were both about 20 years older than the rest of us. You can imagine how difficult we were to put up with. They were wise men. They were really good guys, let me tell you. Boy, they were amazing guys. That's George. Some of these photos are from George's stash that did survive, and some of them are just other ones that were put together. Pirate. It's the area where McKinley is a beautiful mountain area.
Is that the zoo?
It might be the sun. That time of year, in that time of year, the sun was not up for, the one thing you got going for you is you're surrounded by this light. And so it gets whatever reflection there is from the sky and from the moon and everything else. So it does light it up with kind of a ghostly light a good part of the day. And we were thinking we were going to be climbing in darkness, but it wasn't quite like that, I mean, because of the circumstances.
Could it be the sun, have the sun shining on those peaks a bit and the moon setting?
Yeah, that's probably what it is, because that light's coming from here. Anyway, okay, so after we climbed it, it was about 10 years before somebody decided they wanted to do it again. And one guy decided he was going to do it solo, and he went up there, and no one ever saw him again. Another guy decided, well, he was going to do it solo, and he went up there, and nobody ever saw him again. And anyway, then there was several others, and Art said for the first 5 climbs after we had done it, they lost at least one man on every climb. And I said about the fact that you can get yourself in a place where you're arguing and stuff like that, where things are tough. There was a group, I said, that did an alpine ascent that was just going to start at the bottom and go up, and there was 3 of them, and they're climbing in pretty steep terrain. I mean, rock climbing essentially in these circumstances, and tough going. South-facing slope, but nonetheless, it was it had to be pretty damn hard. And they got to one camp. They hated each other. I mean, they just hated each other, which is not a good team thing at all. But anyway, they got to one camp where there was they put up a little 2-person tent, and 3 of them crawled into it, and they kept punching each other, saying, "Give me room, give me," all night long. It's like. But anyway, they got up to the summit, and 2 of them summited. They were just slogging their way up there. They summited, and one of the guys was so exhausted that he just walked right by the summit, and he could have walked 30 feet out of his way and summited the peak, and didn't do it. He was just way too exhausted. He just wanted to get back, hell out of there, and he was going to go by the shortest method. And so anyway. And there was a bunch of almost every one of those climbs after that had one drama or another, and one of them the guys made it up to the summit, and one of the guys went to look back down and lost his balance, and he started rolling over and over, and they just watched him as cameras went flying and gear kept flying off him, and he just disappeared down the peak. And so anyway. Ray Genet, the guy that wasn't wanted, when he came into that mountain situation, he found himself. Man, that's all he wanted to do. He became a McKinley guide, and he made 40 ascents of the mountain, taking people up and stuff like that. Well, one of the climbs that he did with a couple that were a wealthy couple, and they wanted to climb the highest peak in every climb. So they told him, we really enjoy climbing with you, and would you come to Everest with us? And they had gotten a slot in Everest, because you have to book a place years ahead. It's a really popular thing anymore. And so he said, sure, why not? You got to get a shot at Everest. You're not going to turn it down, not if you're Ray Genet. And so anyway. He went with them to Everest, and they climbed up to a certain point, and the man couldn't go any further. He said, "I'm going back down to base camp, and good luck," And so his wife, and Ray and a Sherpa went on, and they made the summit of the peak. And when they got to the summit of the peak, Ray wrote a note, and he said, "For a good time while in Anchorage, call Ellen," and 3 sticks. And left that note there, and asked that was his sense of humor, and he was a real character. And so they went down to their high camp, and in the morning, the Sherpa could not rouse Ray, could not get him up. He was alive, but he couldn't get him to move or do anything.
At the summit?
He's in the camp, the high camp, and so he gets the woman, but the woman, they couldn't get her boots on. You can imagine that. And so she went down without her boots on. He just belayed her across the steep places, and she lost her feet. I mean, there's no way to do that without. And anyway, but that's what happened with Ray, and he was a darling man, a lot of fun to be around, and I'm glad he went on that climb, that's for sure. I know those guys.
Pirate?
Yeah.
Yeah. was he
Pirate. Anyway, my relationship with Art is good today. He came to visit us a couple of times recently, and he's coming back and bringing his wife. He's married to a native woman, and he still lives in Anchorage. The book has made him a pile of money. It's been reprinted several times, and I felt that he did me an injustice in the book. It was written within a year of the climb. He had it out a year after we got back, and we had been at such odds that, well, I don't know, maybe if I had written the book it had been like that, but I don't know. I did write an article for the American Alpine Journal, and I was unable to find my copy so I could read it and see, but I know there was no nastiness in it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the way it was, and it's all right. And Art and I are friends, like I say, and that book is a good read, by the way. If you want an adventure tale, that's a good one. Oh, what? Hold it up. Oh, okay, yeah, there it is.
Say the name.
Minus 148 degrees. That's what the wind chill factor was at the, up there where they were, the 100-mile-an-hour winds and 70 degree, 70 degree below temperatures. So,
We have it at the library.
so anyway, I guess that's all. Maybe we take, we really could hardly take any time for questions, but we had a quick one. Go ahead.
Did you talk about the planes came in and then what did you say to them?
I'm sorry?
The planes came in, flew in, and the chopper came in, and what did you say to them?
Oh, they said they said they picked up those 3 guys. You want to go out? And John, I hollered back down the igloo to John. I said, "You want to go home now?" We just got in that chopper, and they took over the igloo. I said, "You're welcome to it. It's your place." So they took that over for the night. They came out the next day. There was nothing more to do, but they wanted to spend the night up there. I don't blame them. In an igloo, it was pretty weird. And so, George and Shiro, they were at 10,200 feet, and they had no idea what had happened. They only knew they saw the buzzing and stuff, but didn't know what happened. And so they were picked up the next day, and so the day after. So we were.
So that report about 3 coming down was wrong, it was just 2?
No, it was 3 coming down. The 3 guys from up high. Shiro and George had made it down to 10,200 foot camp, but those guys from Denali Pass, the 3 of them that were caught there, came down together.
You thought may have all died. Yeah. You thought they may have all died.
We had a hard time imagining they wouldn't be dead by then, but that gas and food stash saved their lives, and then we were unaware of that.
And so it was the 3 that summited with Art, Pirate, and
Dave. Yeah.
And Dave and Art are still alive.
Dave and Art are still alive, and I think I am too.
So everybody got picked up on choppers in the end.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Was Shiro the fellow that came to Lopez years ago?
Yeah. Shiro came here a few years ago. Yeah.
I know one of his students.
Yeah.
Who had him. He must have been a teacher in Japan.
He was a teacher and a famous climb leader and everything else, and a soft-spoken, sweethearted man.
Yeah,
He wrote a book in Japanese, if you can read Japanese.
So she, from Lopez, she said, "Oh, Greg Blomberg."
Yeah. And so.
Greg, I've got some close-ups here, people. Do you want to just say?
Okay, so that's Art. And that's George, and I don't know who these people are. Anyway, that's George, and then there's Batkin and Dave, and I'm not sure, that had to be one of the girlfriends or something, and I don't know the guy on the right either. And that's John Edwards, the entomologist. and Shiro, and Ray, a pirate guy. And that's one of those planes that Don Sheldon's, checking out the tent. I made a little brochure about the climb, and we used it to solicit funds from different places, and so we could have enough money to make this happen. But, in the end, Life Magazine. Okay, Life Magazine, they had all those pictures, and they had followed us all along, and they sent guys up there and stuff like that. But in the same week, some princess had a baby or something, and that was bigger news. Life Magazine was a weekly news magazine, so they picked the news. And they had a spot in there saved for this thing to happen, and when the princess had her baby, then it took it over. I'm not sure what it was, but something was more important than we were. And so anyway, we never got in Life Magazine.
Well, I'm curious about when you got down to, I don't know, Anchorage or wherever in the press, were you attacked by press and for information? Or?
The rest of us were pretty much ignored. The three guys that summited were the belle of all, and that's, I guess, the way it should be, and it was fine. But all I was thinking of was getting home and getting a sailboat so I could find
Who called the plane and who called Jim Whitaker? I didn't get that. Who called Whitaker to come rescue?
Peggy von Bickman, George von Bickman's wife. She was concerned, so she just did it on her own. Just called, and she maybe even financed it. I don't know, but anyway, yeah. They called to.
So was that a little bit random, or is it because the storm was stormy and you'd been on the summit too long and they knew there was a problem?
Yeah, well, if you look at those news articles out there, you realize they were all running around in circles, saying the sky's falling.
Okay.
And on these guys, on us guys, and so they didn't know what was happening, and that was the worst part. If they knew what was happening, everything would have been more reasonable. But they didn't know what was happening. We could have all been dead as far as they knew. So, but they knew something serious had happened because we were in contact with everybody, and they weren't. Well, thank you very much.